and record this so that those who are not able to join us, they can also watch that. Also, just a reminder, the sessions that we're doing, we're also recording. We will make those available. They should be under your resources section of the website, and or where your announcements and that kind of stuff are. The recordings, once they're uploaded, then they should be available there, so that you can access those, and you'll be able to access them during the 6-day virtual lifestyle session until next Sunday. And then those will be locked up at that point. But we hope that you can, have the opportunity of going back and reviewing things that you didn't quite catch, or maybe you weren't allowed to be there, or something was happening at the time, so that you can have access to those resources. And we did pray, so we're going to get into this topic. If you want more information about what we're covering, there's no way I can cover everything that's in there, but there is a book called The Law of Life, and I did write it, Mark Sandoval. It's available on Amazon or at Uchee Pines bookstore, our online store, which can be found at our main website, which is ucheepines.org. And under there's a tab for the store, and it's available there, but also through Amazon. And with Amazon, it's in the Kindle version as well. So if you want to get it and then follow along during this seminar, then you can get it there on a Kindle version and have it available right away, rather than having to have shipping and that kind of stuff. But let's just dive right in. The Law of Life. We're going to be covering a number of things, like what is disease, where does it come from, what is needed for you to have health, how do you function, what motivates you to do what you do, what's the purpose of your existence, and how can you live a purpose-driven life with health, joy, and freedom. All of those are things that we're going to be looking at, talking about, and accomplishing during, at least through the book. We'll try to get to as many of these as possible in the lectures. So I do like analogies. Jesus was great at stories and analogies as well. So we're going to talk about a tree, and we're going to relate the tree to your health. Now, when you walk up to a tree, there's certain things that you notice. People will notice the shape of the tree. They notice the leaves of the tree, maybe the trunk of the tree. And if it's the season for fruit, like right now, the persimmons are just starting to change color, just starting to get a little tint of orange in them. And so you notice the fruits that's there as well. Well, in this tree, let's say that you have a section that has bad fruit and bad leaves. That bad fruit and bad leaves represents symptoms. Symptoms, of course, are things like pain and coughing and itching and runny nose and so on and so forth, right? And symptoms are very obvious. It's stuff that we know we know that we have it. We know we've got pain, we know we're coughing, we know we're itching, and so on. It's very obvious things, just like the fruit and the leaves are quite obvious. And if there's bad fruit and bad leaves, that becomes quite obvious as well. Now, symptoms, what do we do about symptoms? Are symptoms the problem? If you had bad fruit and bad leaves, would it fix the problem to just pluck off the bad fruit and the bad leaves? Well, the answer is no, it wouldn't fix the problem. It might decrease the burden of disease that might be there, maybe, but it's not going to fix the problem, because the problem lies deeper than just the fruit and the leaves. Now, if you have pain, let's take that as our example. And you've got pain, and your response to pain is to take an anti-pain pill. And so you take that anti-pain pill, and let's say that you have pain in your back, for example. And so you get a Tylenol or something like that. That's not quite taking care of it. You add some Motrin to it as well. It's a little bit better, but you really have a lot of pain in your back. And so you go to the doctor. The doctor adds a tramadol or something like that to it, and it's still really not taking care of it. And so you go back, and maybe they add some Vicodin to it, and you're feeling better, but you still have pain. And so you decide, all right, I'm going to go to a second doctor. I'm going to get a second opinion. And you go to the second doctor, and the doctor does a physical exam and discovers that, oh, well, you have a knife in your back. That's why you have back pain. Now, did the pain pill take care of the problem? Did it fix the problem? No, it didn't fix the problem because the problem is still there. The knife is still in the back. The cause for the pain is still there. And so the pain pill couldn't take away the cause. In fact, no medications can take away the cause of the disease. It can remove the symptoms, but it can't take away the cause of disease. And that's problematic because the symptoms, the disease is there for a purpose. Imagine that you have a fire alarm that's been in your house, and now you're sleeping, you're comfortably sleeping there in the home, and all of a sudden the house starts burning down. And the fire alarm starts going off. And right, and it's really annoying, and you can't sleep through it. And so your response to the fire alarm going off is to get a pillow and to tape it over the fire alarm, right? Now the fire alarm is muffled. You can't hear it so well. Maybe you can go back to sleep. Right? Well, if you did, you're likely to die from that fire that's burning through the house because you're ignoring the warning signal that there's something wrong. And indeed, symptoms are the warning signal that there's something wrong. And if you simply do something that takes away the symptoms, whether it's a medication, whether it's an herb, whatever treatment it may be, whatever you do that simply deals with the symptom is like getting a pillow and taping it over the fire alarm. It doesn't take care of the cause, it only seeks to muffle the manifestation. So if you really want to do something about what's going on, you've got to get deeper than that. And the reason is because the leaves and the fruit do not grow by themselves. They grow off the branches, and the branches represent our behaviors, right? Represent our behaviors. And our behaviors or our actions are very simple things like breathing and drinking and eating and so on. And we know that if your breathing is good, your drinking is good, your eating is good, your behaviors are good, that's going to promote healthy fruit and healthy leaves, good symptoms. But if your behaviors are bad, the breathing, drinking, and eating, and so on, then that's going to promote unhealthy fruit, unhealthy leaves, and painful symptoms, and so on, right? Now, why is it that you must breathe? Why is it that you must drink? Why is it that you must eat? There's a reason for this. The reason is because the branches don't grow from themselves. They grow out of the trunk, and the trunk represents our needs. And you need oxygen, you need water, you need food. This is not an exclusive list, right? There's more needs that we have, but these are just examples of various different things that we need. And the reason that you breathe is because you need oxygen. The reason that you drink is because you need water. The reason that you eat is because you need food. It makes sense. So why do you need what you need? You need what you need because you are what you are. What you are determines what you need. You need oxygen, but if you were a tree, you would need carbon dioxide. You need a certain amount of warmth, but if you were a lizard, you would need different amounts of types of warmth and so on. You need certain types of food or certain types of nutrition, but if you were a pig, your nutrition needs would be slightly different, right? So what you are determines what you need, but everything that you need, the thing you need, is always outside of you. It's always outside of you. It's never inside of you because it must be brought in, and the bringing in is your action. So the oxygen that you need to live by is outside of you, and you must breathe it in to bring it in. The water that you need is outside of you, and you must drink it in to bring it in. The food that you need resides outside of you, and you must eat it to bring it in. Oh, I do have an illustration for that. So here's the oxygen. This is what you need to live by. So it's you have to breathe it in and bring it in so that it can become a part of you. And the water is outside of you, and so you must drink it in order to bring it in so that it becomes a part of you. It makes sense. This is just, basics, simple things, right? So everything that you need resides outside of you, and it must be brought in by you in order for you to have it to fulfill that need. So if your breathing, your drinking, and your eating matches with your need for oxygen, water, and food, that's going to support healthy fruit and healthy leaves, and you're going to have good symptoms. But if your behaviors, your breathing, eating, and drinking do not match with your need for oxygen, food, and water, then it's going to promote bad fruit and bad leaves, and you're going to end up with symptoms. Right. Now, the trunk does not support itself. What supports the trunk? That's the roots. And the roots, oops. All right, let's go here first. You have an individual responsibility, and that responsibility is that you need oxygen, and that oxygen doesn't force its way into you, so you must breathe. You need water. That water doesn't flow into you, you must drink it. And you need food, and that food isn't going to jump down your throat, you must eat it. So everything must first take what it needs. Everything must first take what it needs because it's dependent upon resources outside of itself for its life and function. And then everything gives away what it took so that it might minister to others. Everything in creation ministers to the needs of other things. So our needs, the trunk doesn't grow by itself, it grows by the roots, and the roots represent our beliefs. Now we get it to a place where we just don't see very clearly, right? You don't know exactly what's going on with the roots. If you want to know what's going on with the roots, you have to dig. You got to look there. It's obvious what happens up here, but it's not so obvious what happens down here. So it's not so obvious what somebody believes, but. What you believe will always be manifested in how you behave. What you believe will always be manifested in how you behave. So the behaviors will reveal what you believe. So you might not be able to see the beliefs directly, but you can see the effects of the beliefs, which is the behaviors. Now, if your beliefs match with your needs, then your behaviors will fulfill your needs and you'll have healthy fruit and healthy leaves. But if your beliefs do not match with your needs, then your behaviors will not supply what you need, and then you'll end up with unhealthy fruit and unhealthy leaves. For example, if you believe that you need Dr. Pepper, well, if you believe that, then you're going to drink Dr. Pepper. But do you need Dr. Pepper? The answer is no, you don't need Dr. Pepper. So if you believe that you need it, you're going to drink it, but you don't need it. So you're supplying something that you don't need. That is going to lead to unhealthy fruit and unhealthy leaves. If you believe that you need water, but you believe that you need 2 ounces of water a day, well, if that's what you believe, then what you're going to do is drink 2 ounces of water a day. But do you need 2 ounces of water a day? No, you need much more than that. And so your belief leads to a behavior that does not supply the need that you have. You become dehydrated and you have unhealthy fruit and unhealthy leaves. Let's see how that works. Now, if you have a tree that has unhealthy fruit and unhealthy leaves, is the problem in the tree? Or is the problem outside of the tree? For the tree, most of the time, the vast majority of the time, the problem is actually outside of the tree. You see, the tree it's stationary. It has its roots, but it can't get to all the things that it needs unless the things are brought to it. And so the tree is dependent upon its sources. It's dependent upon the soil. And if the tree has a problem, what you need to do is fix the soil. You need to fix the sources. And when you fix the soil or the sources, then it supplies what the tree needs. The roots will take it in. The beliefs will lead to behaviors that then support the needs, and then you'll have healthy fruit and healthy leaves. Now, as far as sources are concerned, you can have too little of what you need, you can have too much of what you need, or you can have the wrong thing. Like we talked about the Dr. Pepper, but poisons, toxins, envenomations, pollution, other types of things like that, or other things that are there that you could take in, stuff that you don't need, and you can have problems associated with it as well. So if you're going to have a good source, the source needs to have just right. So for example, if you have too little water in the ground, that tree is going to be diseased. If you have too much water for the tree, that tree is going to be diseased. And if you put, instead of water, you put motor oil in the soil, well, that's not what the tree needs, and so that's going to kill it as well. All of those are just simple descriptions, but when we put it all together, we start to see a picture of how disease and dysfunction can start to come about, because we have the wrong sources, we have the wrong beliefs, we have the wrong behaviors, but we can never change what we need. What we need is fixed by law based upon what we are. And that's kind of like the fulcrum on the teeter-totter. That fulcrum where the teeter-totter goes, you know, up and down over, that is the needs, and that will never change. And so it's the beliefs that must change to match the needs. Right? And so that's really where we need to get to. Now, there is something else that we need, and that something else that we need is love. I'll ask this question. I've asked it to thousands of people. Is there anybody here that does not need love? Anybody that's watching that does not need love? Well, I haven't run into anybody yet that doesn't need love, right? So love is a need just like oxygen, water, and food are needs as well. And of course, what you need because of what you are. And since we are human beings, we need love. That's one of the needs that we have. Now, everything that you need resides where in relation to yourself? Inside or outside? The thing that you need. Well, it's outside, right? The oxygen you need was outside of you and must be brought in by breathing. The oxygen you need, the water you need is outside of you and must be brought in by drinking. The food resides outside of you and must be brought in by eating. The love resides outside of you. That's right, outside of you, and it must be brought in. What is the behavior or the action that brings in love? Well, let's say that you have somebody that you might be interested in and they give you a love letter. And you open the love letter and you read, I love you, and you read all sorts of other mushy stuff that's in there. And when you get done with that love letter, you feel loved. You have received love. You have taken in love. But how have you done so? Did it come in because you touched it? Did it come in because, how did it come in? Well, yes, your vision was involved in it, but the vision needed to be interpreted, right? You just have black on white or blue on white or whatever, or if you wrote in red, red on white and so on. And so that must be interpreted, and you must think upon what was written there. And the thinking, you must then turn what was written into a meaning, to bring a meaning out of it. That is all part of a thought process. And so it is thinking that brings in love. It's thinking that brings in love. So when you read love, when you hear love, when you see love, when you experience love from that standpoint, it is thought, it's thinking that brings it in so that it might be your own, right? Now, if you believe wrong relative to love, then you're going to think or behave wrong relative to love. And it's not going to supply the love that you need. And that's going to produce, even in the body, unhealthy fruit and unhealthy leaves. But if you believe correctly relative to love, then you're going to think or bring in the love that you need in the way that you need it. And that will provide healthy fruit and healthy leaves, or promote healthy fruit and healthy leaves. The question still remains, what is the source of the love that you need? Is it other people? Can other people be the source of the love that you need? Not going to answer that now. We're going to get into it later, but just something to think about. Now, all things that function are governed by law. Everything that functions is governed by law. And all laws that govern function are unchangeable. Law of gravity, law of cause and effect, law of thermodynamics, and so on and so forth. They are what they are. And anything that governs functional things that function are unchangeable. right? And the proper function is only maintained by remaining within the law, whatever the law is. Dysfunction is the result of breaking or going outside of the law that governs the function of whatever the thing is. And if we want to get down to the very foundation, which we do, we want to get down to the very fundamental law of nature. And the fundamental law of nature has 2 points. The first point is this, that nothing exists from itself. Nothing exists from itself. All things are dependent upon resources outside of itself for function in life. And again, we just saw that in the tree. You need oxygen, but the oxygen is outside of you. You need water, the water is outside of you. You need food, the food is outside of you. You need power, the power is outside of you. And all of those resources must be brought in order for you to live, in order for you to function. Everything is dependent. Nothing exists from itself. The second part of that fundamental law is that nothing exists for itself. So nothing exists from itself and nothing exists for itself. So all things take those resources in, but they do so not to hoard those resources to themselves. They do so to give away to others. So everything takes in the resources that they need and they do so to give those resources away. Everything takes to give. Everything takes to give. And from this fundamental law come other very secondary laws, I would say, like the laws of thermodynamics that tell us that all energy necessary for a system to function must come from outside that system. That means that everything is dependent upon energy or power from outside of itself in order to function. So we're dependent upon energy, and we're also dependent upon resources, fuel. And then there's the law of cause and effect that comes from this fundamental law of taking to give. And the law of cause and effect shows us that every effect must have a cause and every cause must produce an effect. And we're going to go into this a little deeper in just a minute. So this is the law of life. That's the title of the book. But this fundamental law of all nature is the law of life. And it can be summed up simply by take to give. Everything takes to give. And every other law of nature is built upon this foundational law. Every other one. So, because everything takes to give and everything that functions by law, and because of cause and effect, when you have an effect, now these bad fruit and bad leaves, they're not the cause, they're the effect. If you do something, any treatment, I don't care if it's medication, I don't care if it's herbs, I don't care if it's hydrotherapy or surgery or anything else, any kind of treatment that you apply to the effect that does not take away the cause, that treatment must result in side effects. Must result in side effects. Why? Because if the cause remains, the cause must produce an effect to reveal its presence, to show that it's there. And if you take away the current effect that's going on and the medication or the treatment effectively takes away the current effect, but the cause still remains, then the cause must produce another effect, a side effect, to show that it's still there by law. So every medication, by law, must produce side effects. Every herb, by law, must produce side effects. Every treatment, by law, must produce side effects if it does not take away the cause of the effect that it's treating. Let's see, whoops. There we go. All right, so let's look at another analogy. Here we're going to go on a journey. We're on the road, and this is the pathway of health, or the road of health. And on this road, you have proper function, and it's comfortable. And there are certain things that you need, like oxygen and water and food and warmth and so on. And as long as you remain on this road, it's going to be comfortable, and things are going to function well. Once you get off the road, well, there's going to be dysfunction and it's going to be uncomfortable. And what is it that gets you off the road? Well, or what is it that defines where the road is? That's the law. The law defines where the edge of the road is and what's the dividing line between function and dysfunction and comfort and discomfort. So the law defines that there. Now let's take warmth as our example. Let's say that your temperature goes up and it goes up above the upper level of the limit for the law for your body temperature. How are you going to feel? Well, you feel hot. You have symptoms. And when you feel hot, what do you do about it? Well, you start taking off layers of clothing, you fan yourself, you drink some cold water, you do something. Why? So that you can get your temperature back down into the confines of the law that governs the function of your body temperature. And when you do, now you have comfort and things are functioning well again. If the temperature goes in the opposite direction and your temperature goes down below the lower limit of normal, then now you have symptoms as well, but they're different symptoms. Now you feel cold. You don't feel hot, you feel cold. And when you feel cold, you do the opposite of what you did when you feel hot. You cover yourself up, you turn the heat on, you turn the fan off, you do whatever you need to so that your body temperature can come up, your warmth can increase until you're back within the confines of the law that governs the function of your temperature, your warmth, and then you feel comfortable and you have proper function. It makes sense, right? Now, the symptoms are like the rumble strips on the side of the road. The symptoms are there to let you know something's wrong, to let you know that you're getting off the road. If you hit the rumble strips, you know you're not driving where you're supposed to be driving. So the symptoms have a good function. And that good function is to let you know something is wrong. Now, what happens if you don't stop at symptoms? What happens if you keep going from there? Well, if you keep going and your temperature keeps going up, not only is it going to feel bad, but it is going to be bad and you'll develop disease, real dysfunction. Maybe it's heat exhaustion, heat stroke. Now you've got a headache, your vision is blurry, you can't think very well, maybe you're feeling nauseous or you're vomiting. You feel very thirsty and dehydrated because you've just been sweating and sweating and now you don't have much sweat left. It's horrible, it's absolutely horrible. Why? Because you're really far from the law. And the farther you go, the worse it gets by design. The farther you go, the worse it gets. So that you have a greater motivation to do something significant about it now before something worse happens, right? So you feel really bad so that you're really motivated to really do something about it now. And since it feels so bad, and it is so bad, you might be willing to accept help. You might even ask for help. You might submit yourself to others helping you in ways that you would not even consider if you just started having symptoms here. Like somebody putting you in a bath of ice water and sticking a temperature probe up your rear end and monitoring your temperature and getting your temperature down very quickly so that really bad stuff doesn't happen, right? This is what happens in the military when you have military recruits that have significant hyperthermia and they're out because of it. So yeah, you might submit yourself to things that otherwise you wouldn't in a process to try to help you get back to normal. And once you get within the confines of the law that governs the function of your being, then you start regaining proper function and it becomes comfortable again. Same thing happens in the opposite direction. If your temperature keeps going down and you don't just stop at symptoms, then you're going to have very real disease. Maybe you have chilblains or frostbite or other things like that. It's very painful, it's very damaging, and you must do something about it right away or else it's going to get really bad. And so the pain, the discomfort, the disease is there to let you know that something is really bad so that you really do something about it really much right now so that you can get back. And when you do, Comfort, proper function, right? Now, let's look at the danger of chronic or long-term symptom care. Long-term symptom care is dangerous. Now, short-term symptom care, I think, is there's an appropriate place for that. You cut your fingers off, praise God for pain medication, right? You're going to surgery and they're going to cut you open and do something in there. Praise God for anesthesia, right? So in short-term cases, uh, medication and other types of things like that that deal with the symptoms, I think are perfectly fine or appropriate in its context. But when it comes to long-term treatment, symptom care is dangerous. And why is it dangerous? This is why it's dangerous. Pay attention to the road here and the law. Notice what happens when you start taking, we're going to use pain as our example. This is going to be our symptom that we're having as pain. And we're going to take a pain pill, all right? So here's the road, right? Here's the law. And when I take the pain pill, look at what happens to the road, right? No pain pill, pain pill. No pain pill, pain pill. No pain pill, pain pill. You notice the road is apparently getting wider. The road appears to be wider, but guess what? Did the law change? Did the medication change the law? No, it didn't change the law. Why is it that the road appears to get wider? Because remember, the symptoms, you start having symptoms when you get off the road, and that's like the rumble strips. And when you take the pain pill, it makes it so that you don't start having pain until you get farther away from the road than you normally would have. And so in essence, it starts moving your it starts moving your road. It makes it appear that the road is wider, and it makes it move the rumble strips farther and farther from the road. So you can deviate from the road without knowing that you're deviating from the road. You can defy the law without knowing that you're defying the law, and you can get into danger without knowing that you're getting into danger because you don't have the warning signs anymore, or the warning signs are blunted. And maybe that pain pill wasn't doing enough for you, so you take a bigger one. What happens to the road, right? Smaller pain pill, no pain pill. Small pain pill, bigger pain pill, right? No pain pill. Smaller pain pill, big pain pill. Notice that the road gets wider and wider. It appears to get wider and wider, but the law never changes. And so you can drive farther and farther out of the law without knowing that you're doing so, and without having any consequences, or feeling, I should say, without feeling the consequences, the discomfort of going against the law. And you can go farther and farther from symptoms into disease without having a motivation to find the cause and to do something about it. That's why chronic symptom care is dangerous. It's dangerous because it takes away our motivation to find a cause and remove the cause. And it takes away, it's just like the pillow on the fire alarm, right? It's just like the pillow on the fire alarm. It's not going to help you to do that. Now, what happens? What's going to happen here when you don't stop at disease? You don't stop at symptoms. You don't stop at disease. You keep going. Where are you going to get to? You're going to get to death, right? And that's going to happen on either side. You violate the law on this side, you're going to end up in death. You violate the law on this side, you're going to end up in death. You go from proper function to progressive dysfunction until you get to no function. And it becomes more and more uncomfortable as you get away from the law by design, so that you might have more and more motivation to do something about it before you get to death, right? Now, there is this kind of gray zone before death. It's called, what I call, the point of no return. From a physical standpoint, from a human standpoint, you've gone so far away from the law, you are not getting back, but you're still alive, but you're not getting back. Now, from God's standpoint, there's no point of no return. You can die, and he resurrected Lazarus after 4 days of death, you know, so that's not a problem for him. And, you know, Abel died thousands of years ago and he'll be resurrected. So that's not a problem for God. But from a human standpoint, there is this point of no return. So you can get far enough away that you're not getting back from a natural standpoint. And we don't want to go there. Now, we recognize oxygen, water, food, warmth, and so on and so forth, but we also need love. Is it possible that love functions just like all of these other needs? And that if you violate that, there is a law that governs the function of love, and it defines the boundaries of love, and that if you go outside of those boundaries of love, you will have symptoms. Though you'll hit the rumble strips and it'll start to get uncomfortable. If you continue to progress in that direction, you'll end up with disease. And if you don't stop, you'll end up with death. Now, I propose to you that that is the case. It is absolutely the case. We all need love, just like we need warmth and water and food and oxygen and so on. And if we violate the laws that govern it, then we're going to end up with badness. And it becomes progressively uncomfortable so that we can be motivated to do something about the cause. So in summary, with this part of it, we're going to go on to another part next. But in summary with this part, health is proper function. And that proper function is the effect of staying within the law. If you're within the law, you're going to have proper function, and that's health. Disease is dysfunction, and that's the effect of going outside the law. When you go outside of the law, things are going to be dysfunctional. And symptoms and disease are like the fire alarm and the rumble strips. They are good, right? They are good. The symptoms are not bad, and disease is not bad, meaning that the function of them is not bad, right? It's not good that you have it, but the function of it is good. It's to let you know something is wrong. All right, so let's look closer at law of cause and effect, because we need to understand this. We really got to understand this if we're really going to understand disease and then the solution to disease. All right, so what we understand about law of cause and effect is that every effect must have a cause. No effect produces itself. It has to have something that is producing it. The thing that's producing is the cause. The thing that is produced is the effect, right? So every effect must have a cause, and every cause must produce an effect. If it's a producer, it has to do something, right? Now, if the effect is present, if you have the effect there before you, that means that the cause also is present, because the effect cannot produce itself. It can't produce itself. It doesn't make itself. The cause is the thing that makes the effect. So if the effect is there, the cause has to be there as well. And if the cause is removed, guess what? The effect has to go away. Now, it may take a little time for the effect to go away, because sometimes it takes time for the effect to come. But if you remove the cause, then the effect will go away. And that's really important, because when we're looking at disease, we want to know what the cause is. We want to get to the cause, because if we can get to the cause and the cause can be removed, then the disease, the manifestation of the cause, must go away. That means that there is a cure for disease. And the cure for disease is to remove the cause, whatever the disease may be. So no effect can produce itself. No effect can produce itself. It is dependent upon power and materials outside of itself in order to function. That whatever the effect is, whatever the disease is, whatever the symptom is, whatever it is. So you will never find an effect without a cause. And because of that, there is no such thing as chance. You see, chance is this idea that something can happen without there a cause to it. That's the whole thing behind chance. There is no such thing as chance. Effect always follows cause. Cause always comes before effect in every case, right? There is nothing that is random, because everything has a cause and every cause produces an effect. In fact, the Bible puts it this way in Proverbs 26:2, the curse causeless shall not come. So the Bible itself shows us there is cause and effect. The curse causeless shall not come. And it shows us by this text, there cannot be anything that is random. There is nothing that is by chance. And we're also told that in the laws of God in nature, effect follows cause with unerring certainty, and the will of God establishes connection between cause and its effects. Right? So what is breaking the law called? So we're talking, we're looking at going outside the bounds of the law. We're looking at breaking the law. What is that called? From a Christian context, we know that sorry, just mute people. All right, so we know that is called sin. What law is broken when one sins? Well, it's God's law. I have a picture of the moral law, but it's also his physical laws. Right? He's made them all. All of the laws God has made. And so if you break any of his laws, then it's breaking the law and it's sin. What is the foundation of God's law? It's his character, which is love. Right? So disease is the result of a love problem. Disease is the result of a love problem. And the foundation, the root cause is sin. Now, if you have a chain of dominoes and you have one that knocks over the next, that knocks the next, and the next, and the next, and the next. Yes, you might look at the one that's like the fifth domino down and then knocks the sixth one over, and you might say, well, the fifth one is the cause for the sixth one. No, really, the cause for it is the first domino, right? So what's the first domino that goes down? The first domino that goes down is sin. And then every other domino comes after it. Every other domino comes after that. There is a divinely appointed connection between sin and disease. No physician can practice for a month without seeing this illustrated. If he will be observing and honest, he cannot help acknowledging that sin and disease bear to each other the relationship of cause and effect. And it's true. I've been practicing medicine for a number of years, and I can see that relationship very clearly. All right, the last thing that we're going to be looking at together here is the cells and how the cells function. And so that we can understand that within the context of ourselves and how we function as a whole. So every cell, you have 50 to 100 trillion cells in your body. You have over 250 different types of cells. And every cell has a function. Every cell is kind of like a factory, and a factory produces a product. So every cell has products that it produces. And the function of that cell, it combined with every other cell in your body, makes up the function of your body as a whole, right? So your bodily function, your whole function as a body is dependent upon the individual functions of your cells. And if you lose a particular type of cell, then you lose the function that is specific to that type of cell, and you no longer have that function. For example, if you have type 1 diabetes, well, in type 1 diabetes, there is an immune attack on the beta islet cells in the pancreas. The pancreas resides right back here behind the stomach. Somebody keeps on muting themselves. Right. And so in that pancreas, you have an immune attack, and the beta islet cells in the pancreas are destroyed. Those beta islet cells are responsible for producing insulin. And so when you destroy those beta islet cells, guess what your body can no longer do? It can no longer produce insulin. So you have lost that function. And unless you have some kind of insulin that you can use externally to inject in you as a replacement for what you were supposed to produce yourself, you're going to die. Right? So let's look at cause and effect in the body and time. How does it relate to time? Anytime that you have a cause, it will immediately begin to produce an effect. Anytime you have a cause, it will immediately begin to produce an effect, but it may take time for the effect to become large enough to be noticed. So in that example of the pancreas, here it is behind the stomach, with type 1 diabetes, let's just imagine, I don't know how many beta islet cells that you have, but let's just imagine that you have 20 billion beta islet cells in your pancreas. It's possible, right? So if you have a process, a cause that begins killing 100 of those beta islet cells every second. So now every second you're losing 100 beta islet cells. Well, in a minute, you'll lose 6,000 cells. In an hour, you'll lose 36,000 cells. In a day, you'll lose 8.6 million cells. In a week, you'll lose 60.5 million cells. In a month, you'll lose 260 million cells. And in a year, you'll lose 3.2 billion cells. Now, it's generally recognized, I don't think this is exact, but it's generally postulated that in order for you to begin to notice symptoms, you have to lose about half of that cell population that's responsible for that product. So if you had 20 billion beta islet cells, you're going to have to lose about 10 billion of them before you ever even start having symptoms that are big enough for you to notice. So that means that this process at this rate could be going on for 3 years and 2 months before you even notice that you have a problem. But the cause was there for the whole 3 years and 2 months before you ever noticed that you had a problem. So you can see that the cause can be in place, and it can be some time before the effect is big enough for you to notice it, before it manifests. Now, the effect is always there. It's there all along the way. It's just so small, you weren't able to notice it. So some disease processes are faster, some are slower, some will manifest within seconds, minutes, or hours of its initiation of the cause. Others might take years or even decades to manifest. So when we are looking at we're looking for the cause. When we're looking for the cause in our own life for our own disease, then what we must recognize is that the cause had to be in place before the disease ever manifested. Right? So the cause must be in place before the disease ever manifested. And depending upon the disease and everything and the cause will depend on how much time there was before the cause was in place and the disease began its manifestation. But also we must recognize that if the disease is still present now, then that means that the cause which began back there is still there now, because the effect is still being produced. Right? So if we're looking for the cause, we must look for something that was there in place in your life before the disease ever manifested, and something that is still in place in your life now. That's what you're looking for. That will be where you find the cause. Because if you can find the cause and the cause is removed, then the effect must begin to go away. And that's what we're really interested in. So cells function by law, and they function by the law of life, that fundamental law of nature. And that fundamental law of nature says that everything is dependent upon resources and power outside of itself, right? Nothing exists from itself and nothing exists for itself. So it's dependent upon resources and power outside of itself, and it's the responsibility of everything. The resources are the fuel, the power is the spark. It's the responsibility of everything to take what it needs, but it does so for the purpose of giving things away, producing something for the benefit of others. So each cell is individually responsible to take in the resources and the power that it needs And it does so in order to produce a product. Maybe it's a hormone, maybe it's a cell signaling molecule, an autocrine, paracrine, whatever it might be. And it will produce those for the benefit of others, other cells, other organs, other tissues, and so on. So, what is the fuel? What is the resources that the cells need? Well, they need your oxygen, that's your water, and that's your nutrients. All of these are chemicals. So the cells are dependent upon chemicals. That's your raw materials. That's your fuel that the cells will utilize. And since it takes in chemicals as its fuel, as its raw materials, then its product is going to be chemicals as well, because it takes in the chemicals and then it's going to put out chemicals. Now, everything you need, your oxygen, water, nutrients, and so on, comes in through an organ or an organ system. For example, the oxygen you need is going to come in through your respiratory tract, in through your lungs, and then that oxygen needs to be taken to every cell of the body, because every cell of the body needs the oxygen. So what is the vehicle that's going to carry the oxygen from the lungs to everywhere else in the body in order for the cells to get what they need? That vehicle is the blood. So that's the blood. And so therefore, the Bible says the life of the flesh is in the blood. That's because all of the raw materials that are necessary, the fuel that's necessary for the cells to function, comes through the blood. It's carried there. And so circulation is very important. You must have good circulation if you want to have health. If you mess up the circulation, if you cut off or you restrict blood flow to certain areas, then the cells are not going to be able to get all the nutrients and everything that they need. Then you're going to have dysfunction associated with it. Now, if the supply is good, so you're supplying a good amount of oxygen in this case, if the lungs are bringing in and you're breathing and you're bringing in a good amount of oxygen, then the blood will accumulate a good amount of oxygen and the cells will have what it needs to extract. But with any of the resources, if you have too little or you have too much, that's going to lead to dysfunction. Just like with the tree, if you have too little water or too much water, you're going to cause dysfunction. It's true for the cells as well. Some people are thinking, well, hang on, how can you have too much oxygen? You can't. You can have damage from too much oxygen. You need a certain amount of oxygen. Now, in critical cases with lung diseases and you're not getting enough oxygen in the bloodstream, then it is helpful to increase the environmental oxygen. But if you accumulate and assimilate too much oxygen into the system over a period of time, then you're going to have damage associated with it. So it's got to be in the right range, right quantity. Now, every cell is also dependent upon power from outside of itself in order to function. And every cell functions like electrical units, regulating positively and negatively charged chemicals inside the cell with resulting voltage, current, and resistance, which are all electrical properties. So cells are like electrical units. They're almost like batteries, and they do function on an electrical basis. Now, where are the cells going to get the power that they need? Well, the resources come from outside of themselves. The power comes from outside of themselves as well. Why do you have to have the power? Isn't the glucose the power? No, the glucose is the fuel. It's like the gasoline. There's got to be something that ignites it. The fuel is there, yes, but you have to have something that ignites the fuel. What is it that ignites the fuel? That is the spark. Where does the spark come from? The spark comes through your nervous system. The spark comes through your nervous system. And the nervous system will mediate that power, or will give that power to the different parts of the body through the nerves. That's the pathway, right? And so that electrical power, that spark from the nervous system, is communicated via the nerves to the various different cells of the body, primarily directly through the nerves, but secondarily through the endocrine system. And those nerves will produce chemicals. The endocrine system as well will produce chemicals, or your hormone system will produce chemicals. And when the cells take in those chemicals, it changes the electrical activity of those cells and the function of those cells so that it regulates its product and its use of the raw materials. So that's how you end up having the control. Now, how many cells of the body need to be controlled? All of them do. Every cell of the body needs to be controlled. And they all need to be coordinated together. So the thing that controls and coordinates all of the function of all of the cells in the body is your nervous system. It's coordinated through the nervous system. But remember, the fundamental law of nature says that nothing exists from itself. So the nervous system itself is dependent upon resources and power from outside of itself. So the resources, it needs the nutrients and oxygen, water, it needs those chemicals, so it gets that from the blood. But where does the nervous system get the power? Where does it get the energy from? Outside of itself. It's not the glucose, that's the fuel. Where does it get the power? Remember the laws of thermodynamics, all energy necessary for a system to function must come from outside that system. So that power must come from outside the nervous system. It comes from spiritual information. It comes from spiritual information. You see, the cells, are dependent upon physical things, but we are not just physical. We are spiritual as well. And just like every other organ, or every other thing that we need oxygen that comes in through the lungs. We need water and nutrients that comes through the digestive tract. We need warmth that comes through the skin. You always have to have an organ or an organ system in which the things you need come into the body. And for the spiritual information to come into your body, you must have a spiritual organ, and that is your spirit. That's your spirit. We're told in the Bible, Genesis 2 and verse 7, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. So God took dust, added the breath of life, and that became a living being. In other words, God took the body, added to it the spirit, and that became the soul, right? A living soul. And just like a computer that is dependent upon hardware and software, and can only function when the two are brought together. If you have software with no hardware, no function. If you have hardware with no software, no function. The function is only there when you have the two of them working together, when they are co-working, right? Same thing with the spirit and the body. Body only, no function. Spirit only, no function. Put the body and the spirit together, now you have function. But when you do so, when you make a computer, the hardware does not become the software, and the software does not become the hardware. Each remains what it is and retains its own part of the function and does not become the other. Similarly, in us, the spirit does not become the body does not become the spirit. They each remain what they are, retain what they are, and they retain their own parts of the function, but there is no function until they're brought together. We're also told in Genesis 1:27, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. So we're created in God's image. Praise God for that. So we're created to function like God functions. So in creation, which came first? Was it the physical or was it the spiritual? Well, who created everything that there was? It was God. And so we're told in Genesis 1 that God said, and it was so. And we see with each day, God said, and it was so. God said, and it was so. God said, and it was so. And Jesus tells us in John 4:24 that God is spirit. So we ought to take Jesus' testimony as trustworthy. And Jesus also says in John 6:63, he says, the words that I speak to you are spirit, and they are life. So God said, that's spirit, right? The words that I speak are spirit, and God is spirit. So from the spiritual comes everything that is physical. From the spiritual comes everything that is physical. We are created in God's image, and in us, the spiritual is first. which then impacts the physical. So let's just take thought as our example, right? Thoughts. Are thoughts spiritual or are they physical? Well, how much does a thought weigh? What's its density? How many atoms is it made up of? What's its molecular formula, right? Well, thought is not physical, it's spiritual, but it has physical effects. And we can measure the physical effects, right? To have thoughts, you must have a spirit because it's the organ in which the spiritual comes through, right? And is brought to the body. But the spirit itself cannot think. It's the soul, which is the spirit and the body together, the spirit and the brain, which makes the mind, right? The mind is not just the brain, the mind is the brain and the spirit, right? And it's the mind, not the brain, that can think. So we've been led to believe that the brain itself thinks without the presence of a spirit. That's what we've been led to believe. But where does this come from? Where's this idea from? It comes from modern science and evolution. So evolution tells us that matter is self-existent. There was a big bang, and from nothing, everything came. Science tells us, or evolution tells us, that matter is self-sustaining. So not only can it produce itself, but it can sustain itself. Also, it tells us that matter can organize itself into complex systems. And so you go from randomness and goop and other things like that, and then it becomes more and more complex, and then you have a worm, and then a worm turns into a mollusk, and a mollusk turns into this and that, and so on. And so it becomes more and more complex over time. And so matter itself can organize itself. That matter can create life through complexity. So with this complexity, now you have life that comes from matter, right? And then matter can regulate itself. Matter can give itself commands, can mutate itself, can destroy itself, and so on and so forth. And matter, when it's complex enough, can be conscious, can think and feel, and have all the spiritual capacities that we're aware of. And the more complicated the system that matter makes up, the more complex the spiritual capacities. All of these we have been told since we were children from evolution and modern science. But this is why we believe that the brain can think. This is why we believe that viruses and bacteria can mutate themselves. This is why we believe that cells can program themselves to die in a process called apoptosis and so on. All of this comes from evolutionary theory. But the law of life shows us that none of this can be true. None of it can be true. Why? Because everything is dependent upon resources outside of itself. And it is not the physical that is the beginning, it's the spiritual. The physical is the effect, but science sees the physical as the cause. And when you see that when you believe that the effect is the cause, then you get everything backwards. Everything upside down, because now your focus is at the effect, thinking that it's the cause, and so you're going to do everything in order to try to fix the effect, but you can never fix the effect until you get to the cause. But if you don't recognize what the cause is, you're never going to get to the cause. So if you go to your doctor and you ask your doctor, why do I have this disease, and you keep asking them, why do I have it, why do I have it, they'll never be able to tell you why you have your disease. They don't know. Why? Because their knowledge is based upon evolutionary theory, and evolutionary theory gets everything backwards, turns everything upside down, doesn't know what the cause is, and then focuses on the effect, thinking that it's the cause, and then does everything to try to fix the effect. And I don't need to go into a whole bunch of details there. All right, so that spiritual information is taken in by the spirit. The spirit then makes that power through decision available to the brain, which then takes it in and generates electrical activity, right? So when that power is transferred from the spirit to the physical body, the cortex of the brain, it changes its form into electricity, and now you have electrical impulse, and you can do EEGs and other things like that. That electrical impulse is transmitted down the nerves to the various different cells of the body, which then take in the result of that, and it changes its function and its electrical activity. And thus through spiritual information and the spirit through the nervous system, all of the cells and their functions are coordinated and regulated. And it's the soul, which is the combination of the body and the spirit together. That's the soul, and the soul is the thing that thinks. Not the spirit, not the body, but the soul, right? And we are told that God said, let us make man in our own image, according to our likeness. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. We were created in the image of God, and God is the author of truth. He's the author of love. That's his character. And so we were made so that the spiritual information that we take in is truth. God created us so that we would only take in the truth. We will only take in the truth. And when we take in the truth, that provides the correct power for the spirit, which makes the correct decisions, that is made available to the cortex of the brain, which generates the correct electricity, which is transmitted down the various nerves to the different cells of the body, and it leads to proper function and proper control of those cells. But if I am deceived into believing that a lie or an error is the truth, and I take that lie and error in as the truth, because I cannot take it in if I think it's a lie. If you think it's a lie, if you think it's an error, you're not going to take it in. You can only take in the truth. But when you believe that the lie or the error is the truth, then you will take it in as truth, but it isn't truth. But when you take it in, when the spirit takes it in as truth, it changes that which the spirit brought in. It changes then, the spirit makes different decisions based upon that, which then brings a different electricity, a different power, and a generation of a different electrical current that is then transmitted down the nerves to the various different cells of the body associated with the place in that cortex where the power came in. And it leads to dysfunction, dysregulation of those cells. And this, believing lies, believing the error, is the major cause for cellular dysfunction through this pathway, Now, there are, let me look at my time. Oh, I got to wrap up pretty soon. All right, there are several different causes for dysfunction. One of the causes for dysfunction is inheritance. You can have messed up DNA, you can have bad blueprints that you got from parents or grandparents. And when I say inheritance, I mean that you have DNA that's messed up, that is in genes that the cells have to use for vital functions. And so if it's messed up and the cells have to use it for vital functions and it gets messed up, now you create dysfunction and early death. Cystic fibrosis, oh boy. You have sickle cell disease, Huntington's chorea, other conditions like this where it's inherited. You cannot get away from developing it, and you will die early despite all attempts to do anything about it. Why? Because every cell in the body that will use that gene, and it's a life-giving, you got to have it for proper life and proper function, and that gene is messed up so you don't have the proper function. Every cell that uses that gene must manifest the bad blueprint, and it puts out bad products that does not support the function of other cells, and so you end up with dysfunction and early death. So there's inheritance. You can have environmental issues where you have too much temperature, too much pressure, too little temperature, too little pressure, gunshot wounds, stabbings, cuts, abrasions, burns, frozen freezing yourself and so on. All of those can cause dysfunction as well, right? Because the cells function within the context of certain environmental limits. And when you get outside of those limits, you create dysfunction. Dysfunction can come because of raw materials, right? So you can have too little of what you need, or you can have too much of what you need, or you can add things that you don't need, like poisons and envenomations and other things like that. And those raw materials, when taken in by the cells and utilized by them, will then bring dysfunction and badness that happens because of that. The fourth, and so there are certain things that we ascribe um, to raw materials that we can't really ascribe to raw materials. For example, there's a condition called gout, painful inflammatory arthritis, typically of the first metatarsal phalangeal joint right there at the base of the big toe. It's an accumulation of uric acid crystals, and there's inflammation and pain and so on. And this is not uncommon where you have it in one foot but not in the other foot and so on. And it's very painful. Well, we think it's related to uric acid, and indeed, when you take medications that decrease uric acid levels, then the manifestation of the condition goes away. But there's a problem with this, and we'll get to that in a minute. We also ascribe raw materials like cholesterol as the cause to plaque development in the arteries and blocking the arteries. But there's a problem with that theory as well. And, like breast cancer or some other lung cancer or something like that. You have lung cancer or breast cancer over here on the left side. And, so we say that might be related to a high consumption of processed animal foods or whatever. Well, the problem with that is diffusion. You see, you get a substance like a dye and you put it into a solution. Well, it will eventually move itself out into an even concentration throughout the entire container that it's in. And the same thing happens in the bloodstream. So when you have gout and you have high uric acid levels, your uric acid concentration is high, when we send you the lab, we don't send you the lab so that the lab can draw blood out of your toe and stick a needle in your toe. No, they don't do that. They draw the blood out of your hand, or they draw your blood out of your arm, and then we know whether uric acid levels are high. Why? Because the uric acid levels are essentially the same throughout the entire bloodstream because of that law of diffusion. And so we know that if the level is high in the arm, it's going to be high in the foot. And if it's high in the neck, it's going to be high in, other places. So it essentially is the same throughout the bloodstream. So why can gout not be because of uric acid? Well, you have gout right here in this joint, but your uric acid level concentration is high over here as well. How come you don't have gout in this joint? And what about this one down here and this joint over here? And what about these toes? And what about your knee and other places? Well, if it was simply because of uric acid, you should have a manifestation in every joint because you have high uric acid concentrations throughout your bloodstream, but you only have a manifestation here. So it cannot be just because of the chemical, can't be just because of the raw material. Same thing with cholesterol. The cholesterol concentration in the bloodstream before you get to the plaque is essentially the same as cholesterol concentration at the plaque, which is essentially the same concentration of cholesterol after the plaque. So if you have a big plaque here, but you don't have a plaque here or there, how come you have a plaque here, but not there and there? If it was simply because of the concentration, you would expect buildup to be like this, where it's essentially universal and along the entire blood vessel. But that's not what you see. You see this, where there's an accumulation in certain spots. So it can't just be the cholesterol. And with the cancer, well, maybe you had a lot of animal proteins that you ate in your life, and you had a bunch of hot dogs and other types of things like that. And yes, we know that they're carcinogens and so on. But now the question is, why did the cancer develop on the left side and not the right side? The animal, when you ate the hamburgers and the hot dogs and other things like that, did the blood preferentially go to the left breast or the left chest? No, the same concentration was going to the right side. So why did you develop a cancer on the left? Nobody's asking these questions, and so we're just not getting answers for it. Well, I'll give you a possibility. And that is this. It's point number 4, and that is the energy. Where does the energy come from? Through the spirit, through the nervous system, via the nerves to the different cells of the body to change their electrical function and their product, right? How they produce. So how does that work in these situations? And this is the cause of at least 90% of diseases, maybe more. So you have a particular nerve that goes to that particular joint, right? You have a nerve that goes to that particular joint. So that nerve can carry a signal from the cortex down to that particular location, which can then cause the cells to produce uric acid, because cells do produce uric acid, and to increase the uric acid concentration in that joint, which then crystallizes, and then you end up with gout in this toe, but you don't end up with gout anywhere else because none of the other nerves are sending that signal. Or you can have a nerve that's coming to this section of the artery where you don't have in the other sections of the arteries, and that nerve is sending a signal that is causing an inflammatory signal to be released, and then the immune cells are coming in to see what's going on in this area, and they die in the area and leave the cholesterol plaque behind, and so on. Why? Because you have a signal that's being sent down that specific nerve to that specific location that's causing dysfunction in that area. And the same thing happens with cancer. We know that if you cut the nerve that goes to the center of a tumor, the tumor changes how it behaves, And we know that that in every process of metastasis with cancer, that the nervous system has an input, and it's all along the process. And if you change the nervous system input, what's coming up from up here to the cancer, it changes entirely how the cancer behaves. Most people do not know this, and so they don't know the impact that the thoughts and thinking and attitudes and everything has on their health. Every effect has a cause, and every cause produces an effect. And all the energy necessary for a system to function must come from outside that system, or for the system to dysfunction. So the materials, there must be a cause for this cancer, and the energy necessary for it to be produced comes from outside of it, not inside of it. So if you want to know what the cause is, you have to look outside of the cancer, because if you look inside the cancer, you can never answer the question why, because the why came from outside of it. So the cause can never be found where the effect is. The cause can never be found where the effect is, because the cause always comes from outside of the effect. So a biopsy can never tell you why you have the cancer. Never. It's the only place that you can look and guarantee that you will never find the cause, is in the thing itself, right? The biopsy can tell you what it is, but it can never tell you why. The why is always outside of the cancer. Now, the fifth cause and final cause for dysfunction is the enemy. We know with Job and in his situation, he was a righteous man in all his ways. That was God's testimony of him. It was not an inheritance issue, an environment issue, raw materials, or energy. It was the enemy that was allowed to do this to Job and cause these for a particular purpose. And so his disease and dysfunction came because of the assault of the enemy. That still does happen, but I believe it's very rare. The vast majority is because of our thoughts, our attitudes manifested through the nervous system to the cells, and dysfunction as a result of that. Now, what about the situation that we're living in, and all of the infectious disease concerns and manifestation, and cautions and everything that are given? Well, does exposure equal illness? Exposure alone will not lead you to be ill. Susceptibility alone will not bring any illness either. If you're exposed but you have no susceptibility to the thing, there's no illness. If you're susceptible to it but you're not exposed, you don't have any illness. It is only when you're susceptible and you're exposed that you end up having illness. And what about susceptibility? Susceptibility is a function of the individual, not the environment, right? That's your own issue. Your susceptibility is your own issue. And if you simply treat external factors, you may improve your exposure, right? But you can't guarantee that. But you'll never fix the susceptibility. if you focus on external factors, because susceptibility can only be dealt with internally. So what is the cause of susceptibility? The answer to that is we're not going to answer it right now. Again, if you want more information, there's The Law of Life by Mark Sandoval. It's available on Amazon. You can get that through on Kindle or in paperback. You can also get it at Uchee Pine's website at our bookstore at ucheepines.org. I am going to stop sharing this screen right now, and then we'll do a very short period of Q&A and give you some instructions for, well, let me give you instructions for tomorrow morning, and then we'll do that short period of Q&A. Let me